Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all here, and also those of you joining us via the links on YouTube. My name is Patrick Ravines, and I'm the chair of the department. And I've been here 14 years, and some of them have all been good 14 years. But before I continue, I'd like to read the university's land acknowledgement statement. Buffalo State University would like to start by acknowledging that the university is situated within the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, including the Seneca, Tuscarora, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk nations, and of their indigenous relations and neighbors, the Erie and the Wenro. We hope to demonstrate respect for the treaties that were made on these territories, and we pledge to work towards partnership with a spirit of collaboration with our current indigenous neighbors, the Seneca and the Tuscarora. And again, welcome again to all of you in person and on YouTube. And to me, this is really a very sweet moment, but also a sad moment, because this is the last time the class of 2024 has come home to make their final presentations, and then they're off to do their careers in conservation. What I'd like to ask is for all of the 10 members of the class of 2024 to stand, to look at the audience, and I want to ask you to heartily congratulate them. Please, please stand. Don't be bashful. This is your day. You can sit now, thank you. Notice, if you notice anybody with a stole, they're one of the class of 2024. You can count all 10 of them. So what I'd like to do right now is to welcome our guests. Our president, Dr. Bonita Durand is here, and she will be making the opening remarks in a bit. I also want to welcome all family, partners, and supporters of the program. I want to also thank all the faculty and staff who are here. I want to mention that Emily Hamilton was playing with her kids and has a crick in her neck, so she will be joining us from YouTube. And I also want to welcome 2 alumni board members, Colleen Snyder from the class of 2008 and Lorna Brundret from the class of 2023, so almost freshly minted last year. I'd just like to mention also that we have an active alumni board, and Colleen and Lorna will be telling us about that at the beginning of the afternoon session. Now, I'd like to just give you a few bits of background about our president, Bonita Durand. Dr. Durand was named interim president by the SUNY Board of Trustees, and the SUNY system encompasses 64 campuses. Everybody okay? Okay. And she will be serving in this role until a permanent president is appointed. She retired in 2018 after 22 years of service to SUNY Buffalo State University, where she served as chief of staff and secretary to the Buffalo State College Council. During her tenure, she served under 5 presidents. That, in my book, that's a wow. Congratulations. Now, in addition, she was a graduate faculty member in the university's Higher Education Administration Department, where she taught courses on the history of American higher education and strategic planning and finance in higher education. Another 2 cents of mine, that is, there's likely nobody better to be leading Buffalo State at this time, truly. And she's an active Western New York community member who has dedicated her time to numerous organizations across the city and the region, and she is a proud grandma. She's got many grandkids and many great-grandkids. Congratulations. I just started that process in the last couple of years. And please, join me in welcoming Dr. Durand to come to the podium. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Okay. And let me also add a welcome to our families and friends of our amazing graduates. Welcome not only to the Simonelli Recital Hall, where the art conservation, in the area where art conservation lives, but also to Buffalo State University. We're so happy to have all of you with us today as we celebrate these wonderful graduates. I think this is the 51st class. Is that right? Okay, 51st class of the Buffalo State Art Conservation Department. Now, you have to understand a little bit about the history of this department. This is absolutely a labor of love, attention, and care that's gone on for quite a while and grew up out of Buffalo State's interest and support of this important discipline, this important art. So we're very, very proud of where our program has come to, and we're also extremely proud of all of our graduates. I am going to tell you all, at the beginning, the life of a president is not an easy one. Hence, I wear my sneakers because I have several other places to get to today, and so I will not be able to stay with you for the entire length of your program today. But know that that's not because of anything other than the other obligations that I've taken on in this new role. So as I started to tell you earlier, Buffalo State's Art Conservation Department is one of the leading programs of its kind in North America. And you can find our graduates in conservation labs and studios and in major institutions across the United States and in museums. And today we are so proud to celebrate our newest graduates of this program, which is highly selective and highly competitive, as you can see by the number of graduates that we have here today. We're going to send you all out in the world of conservation, and just know that you've got the very best education and training that can be offered in this field. There are lots of people to thank for this, and I don't know if there's an order, but I first want to thank the Garman family. The Garman family has been and continues to be the guardian angel, if you will, of this program. They believe in it, they support it, and they've actually created pathways and resources to make sure that we have an amazing art conservation program for years to come. And I also want to thank the faculty and staff for the exemplary teaching and training and mentoring and commitment to the students that we see here today graduating. But I especially want to thank the families, friends, and other supporters of our amazing students, because you fall in my category. When I walk around and look at some of the work that they do, I probably understand every other word that they're telling me about how this process went along. So I'm not an expert in art conservation by any means, but I can tell you just by the enthusiasm, the care, the detail that these students talk about what their projects are, what they're doing. They just are not technicians. They're actually historians. And above all, I believe they are artists, because they take something that once was beautiful and they make it beautiful again. So again, I haven't had as much time this year. There's a little thing called a budget that I have to keep going and out and advocating for. So I haven't had quite the time this year that I have in the past to visit with the art conservation students, but I'm going to tell you what you're going to see today in their presentations is just going to be amazing. So family and friends, you have stood behind these students. You have cheered them on. You have made sure that they have what they need to be successful in this career. And from the bottom of my heart and the heart of everyone here at Buffalo State, we must thank you, and I would like to applaud you at this time. Thank you. It's just, you just can't replace what you get from your family and your friends. And finally, to Elisse, Daniela, Elly,
YouTube setup, Zhuan Shen, Associate Professor, for working with everybody else to also make sure that with the slides and everything is going smoothly. I want to also thank Kelly, second year, Zhuan's assistant, and first years, Samantha Tepper and Victoria Kitiratragan, for all your help. And now I will ask Rebecca Plosier to come up and introduce our first speaker, and we will be full of exciting talks all day long. So hold on to your seats. Rebecca, please.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm super happy to introduce our first speaker of the day, Elisse Brautigam. Elisse graduated with her BA in Art History from the University of California at Los Angeles. While at UCLA, she was a preservation assistant at the Library Conservation Center and a preservation reviewer in the Department of Preservation. She also held pre-program internships at the Conservator's Easel, LLC, in paintings conservation and the Los Angeles County Museum of Art and Collections Management. Before starting her graduate studies, Elisse was an objects conservation intern with Fine Art Conservation, where she focused on treating three-dimensional art. She completed a summer internship at the Glenstone Museum in Potomac, Maryland in 2022, focusing on their contemporary art collection, time-based media projects, and outdoor sculpture maintenance. Elisse spent her third year interning at the Denver Art Museum, where she will be staying as the Kress Fellow in Time-Based Media. So let's welcome Elisse.
Thank you. Thanks, Rebecca, so much for that lovely intro. And good morning again to everyone. I'm really excited to tell you about my journey in Colorado, Denver, and Aspen this year, treating modern and media art. I'm going to go over some of the selected treatments selected treatments that I found to be really rewarding, as well as kind of have an overarching theme of collaboration and teamwork, as well as opportunities that I had to do outreach workshops and conferences. The majority of the time was spent in Denver at the Denver Art Museum, and as soon as I got there, I really felt welcomed by the team at the Conservation Department, including Sarah Melching, Gina Lauren, Kate Muma-Taylor, and Aaron Burgess, who actually did graduate from Buffalo himself. So I've been really lucky to work with some wonderful people this year and really learn from them. The first thing I was really appointed to by Kate was a backlog of acquisitions from the past year of digital videos, and to condition assess them. And that meant kind of going through each artwork and through the multiple files that we would receive for each of the artworks to decide which would be considered a master file, exhibition file, or a reference file. And that meant kind of, first off, conversing with artists as well as the registration team in finding with registration, finding the right descriptors to go through and put these artworks into the databases, as well as working with the artists themselves. As I said, this meant sometimes communicating via artist questionnaires so that they could tell us what they were sending us, and making sure that those were the right formatting of what we got in, as well as sometimes even having Zoom conversations with them. And sometimes I would take some translation. A lot of the artworks that we received were for the Latin America department or the Native Arts department. So that was a really great opportunity in collaboration, working together, and being able to not only get to know the registration, but also really work at having a good rapport with artists as well. And not only that, making these schematic diagrams of each of the artworks with their files really helps out with registration, and I was able to kind of use skills when it came to disk imaging, because sometimes we would get our files via DVD rather than just like a file itself, and so that would require kind of disk imaging those DVDs so that we could get them to a more preservation form and master form and format for ourselves. Another project that I found to be really rewarding and important to me, and really uses this idea of alliance and partnership, was the Alan Rath Preservation Plan. Alan Rath, we have three artworks by Alan Rath in the collection: Looker, Two, Family, and Skywatcher. And Alan Rath was a Bay Area artist that the museum was really kind of working with to maintain his artworks, and he worked in electronic sculpture. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2017 of MS before they were able to really complete that preservation plan, so it came to me to finalize and finish, and I was really happy to do so. It was really a great opportunity. The artworks themselves are essentially electronic sculptures that have within them a software that he made that's a randomization software that goes through digital files, images, and then kind of spits them out onto a CRT and projects them as a moving image. So I wanted to create a plan that was going to be a long-term solution in preserving these media components, the media files themselves, to get them to a kind of a storage that's more stable, as well as the short-term solution of the functionality of the artwork and documenting that functionality through video. So I wanted to do a thorough inspection of all three artwork circuitry boards for any component degradation, like wide accretions or rusting, which is already kind of done periodically throughout the years. But while I was doing that, I also wanted to take an inventory of the components that we had media-wise. And I found that all three artworks have a memory board, a chip board that was originally written and made or copyrighted by Alan, and then has across 3 EPROMs on that chipboard the binary files of the software and the images. EPROMs stand for Erasable Program Read-Only Memory Chips, and these files and the files that are on them are in danger of being lost because of obsolescence or fragility of EPROMs. They're really popular to use in like the 90s when these artworks were made. However, they're going, like I said, obsolete. But not only that, they're erasable via UV light. So you can, there's a little window on the chip itself that you can shine light through and you can, erase the whole thing. So they're in danger of being lost that way as well. And the only thing that's really protecting that window are stickers. And the stickers are losing their adhesivity and falling off really while we were looking at them. So we covered them back up with green tape. But it really kind of underlined that urgency of needing to get these to something that was going to be more stable, like a cloud-based storage system, and get the files off these chips. So I reached out to SF MoMA, who also had some Alan Rath artworks themselves, and they had never really dealt with their EPROMs before, so they pointed us towards the Hosfeld Gallery, who represent him, the artist, and they then introduced us to Joshua Eveland, who worked closely with Alan in the last years of his life and with archiving and conserving and maintaining and updating a lot of his artworks. And he gave us a whole wealth of files that could probably that gave us really good information of what is possibly on those EEPROM chips, although they were for different editions of the artworks, so they're not necessarily going to be exactly the same. So we were still really wanting to be able to look and see what we had specifically. And the Hospital Gallery also told us about Jim Campbell, who fortuitously actually was already in our collection as well as an artist. He was a contemporary of Allen's and also worked with EEPROMs. And when we were talking to him, he so graciously agreed to bring his EEPROM reader with him in October when he is visiting for an artist lecture so that we can look at our EEPROMs and see what we have. So that is going to be really exciting for us, and we look forward to building on that relationship with Jim, not only to look at Allen's, but he also has his artworks within our collection also have EEPROMs, so possibly to look at his as well. As I said before, the other condition I wanted to have during this preservation plan was how to document the functionality of the artwork itself, just in case there's ever like a chance that the emulation wouldn't be possible for this artwork. We would at least have a video of the artwork functioning for display or for use. And that required capturing the image from the CRT. And in order to do that, I found that with CRTs, there's a refresh rate that's about 60 frames per second or 60 hertz that isn't visible by the human eye. And what happens is that the electrons will go across the screen as pixels, like doot, 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 and then they'll start to fade. And we can't see that fading occurring. However, a camera can pick it up. So there was something that needs to occur where the shutter speed needed to be changed. And I found this out using retro gaming forums that really enjoyed filming their CRTs of them playing. So that was really helpful. But the 60 hertz, if you change your shutter speed to anything that's a factor of 60, you'll be able to get a clear picture of the artwork or of your CRT screen. So that's been really beneficial to us, and I was really happy that we were able to get clear shots of it so that we can use them in the future. Speaking of retro gaming, if I can get to the next slide, I was really fortunate to spend some time with the Rosencrantz collection in June for a week, where they have 80 significant works of art, of time-based media art, and working on the installation for 2024, which was going to be focused on how culture, technology, and aesthetics of video games have transformed art making. So a lot of the artworks that came in were kind of new to the collection, but they needed to be assessed because they're new, and this includes one such game, the Bush Soul 3 by Rebecca Allen, which was made in 1999, that explored the convergence of art and game design. And the work itself, it runs on a dedicated computer provided by the artist. Yeah, it's on. And it's a mini PC, and it runs Windows 7, and it comes with an executable file, an audio file, which unfortunately I don't have the audio here because this is a screen grab of me playing the game, and audio doesn't work with screen grabs, and a joystick, Logitech joystick. And essentially the artwork itself is an interactive artwork using this custom software called Emergence that the artist made, which is an early AI software system That includes a behavior scripting language to define the general behaviors and personalities of AI artificial life forms or creatures before setting them off into their virtual world as live simulations. One of the first things I really wanted to do was to play the game itself, because that's how you assess it. And also I was excited to play the game. And so I spent about an hour going through the worlds of the Bushel 3, and it was what would happen is there was about a 20-minute period of turning from day into night. And during that time, you're a glowing orb that you control with that joystick, and it's a haptic feedback that would happen at certain points. If you go to like a feeding area, it would shake, or if you approach certain creatures, it would shake. And then around towards the end of that time, you kind of don't have control of the orb anymore, and a group of like these geometric birds, as you saw on the screen, kind of like encircle it and create this ritual. And then at the end of that ritual, it the orb gets spit back up into the air and comes back down to Earth and to start the day again. So once we found out that basically the functionality of the artwork was doing what it was supposed to do, a decision was kind of made to preserve the software for long-term archival storage. So it runs on an MSATA SSD card for its hard drive, and we disk imaged that, and using a hard drive enclosure attached to a write blocker, and then the DD command via terminal, so that we could get a good disk image to preserve it for the longer term. The other thing I wanted to do was to look and see at the audio file specifically. We received a USB drive with the files on there as well, and so I kind of took the file and looked at it analyzed it via media info to see if the formatting was like a preservation grade format. And it's an audio interchange file format, which I really had never really seen before, but looking on the Library of Congress database, I saw that, yeah, it's widely adopted among Apple users and engaged in professional audio work, and it's used as a master file usually, or and actually usually as a master file for audio captured live or reformatted from analog resources. So essentially, it's a good well documented format, and we could continue forward without having to like re-encode it or something. The only other big thing that I wanted to make sure occurred was that the joystick we got a backup of it, because it is an essential component of the artwork, along with the computer itself also being dedicated to the artwork. So you want to make sure that that is checked each time. But with the joystick, we wanted to get an extra one preemptively, because it's not only dedicated to artwork, but it's also used quite a bit during the display of the artwork. Because it's interactive, it means people can play with it. So it would kind of mitigate the risk of this artwork being down or out of service for any amount of time while it's on display, if we were to get a second one immediately before waiting. And I found my time with the Rosencrantz collection to be really fruitful and important to getting to a place where I understood more about installation when it comes to time-based media art. I was there for a while that week, but then before that I had been there for a summer, and so it was really quite an experience being able to continuously work with people who are preparators or art handlers when it comes to time-based media, and being able to work alongside them. So that was really a great experience. I didn't only work with time-based media, I also worked with modern objects quite a bit, and that was back at the Denver Art Museum. I had several experiences involving modern objects, Jesus. And that includes outdoor sculpture cleaning, large installation assessments for when they were going to go out on loan, and just anytime there was a need for extra hands and treatment with exhibition rotations. And that made me feel really like I was part of the team, like I was an important person, and I really challenged that. Like, I cherished the fact that they didn't just see me as like an intern, but they really wanted to utilize me and include me in those sort of opportunities, or work environments. So yeah, one of the objects that I did quite enjoy treating was a sculpture that was made out of wax. It's called waterfall calligraphy. It's an 8.5 foot tall sculpture. And it's made up of paper and ink, like calligraphy, like Chinese calligraphy, that are balled up, and then paraffin wax mixture that's like dripped over this pile of calligraphy. It was originally created in 2003 as part of a larger installation artwork by the conceptual artist collective Yanxingyang group, and it was headed by Zhang Gaogu. And it's really a visually stunning sculpture. It's reminiscent of the general waterfalls often featured in traditional ink painting. However, it arrived at the dam in 2020 in a kind of a damaged state that happened during shipping and transport, especially to the four corners and the kind of delicate dripping elements. They are fragmented and broken off, and so I really wanted to be able to reincorporate them so that we could have it for the Asian gallery rotation. Also, not only the breaking, but there was a huge overall discoloration to the piece, some staining, embedded dirt, leaves, cobwebs. It may have been maybe due to storage. We're not sure. But what I wanted to start off doing was gently dry cleaning it. And while I was doing that, I kind of collated all the broken pieces into baggies that you can see on the table. There's a lot of baggies. That's the picture from above. And at least see if I could reintegrate these pieces, these broken pieces, or if not that, then make them into accessories for the artwork and keep them that way. After cleaning, I did some testing and wanted to see if I could get that discoloration and get that kind of glow to come back to the artwork. So we tested with an MCP aqueous system, and I determined that it would be like 1 part 6 pH EDTA to 4 parts DI water. It really helped with removing that staining and embedded dirt. Not just me, because this is a 5.5 foot sculpture, but I had help with the conservation assistant who had just recently started, Faith Godwin. She really jumped in and really helped me out with this, so I really appreciate that, in applying this all over using cotton swabs and then clearing with DI water. The next part was reintegrating those separated wax pieces. And to do that, a 30% Bootvar B98 and ethanol tested really well because it was the most stable yet flexible. So it wouldn't be something that could become brittle and break off again. So that was really great, as well as using just kind of heating a little bit to kind of just like soften it and get it back into place was also another way of doing that. If the pieces and areas were too small and fragmented to get back into place, we used filling. For that, I used a paraffin wax that I bought off of Amazon. I found that the melting point, I took a sample, and the melting point was very close to paraffin wax mixture. So it was safe to say this was paraffin wax. And we also used some of the smaller pieces that were too small to put back in to melt down and use as filling as well. And yeah, this is the piece traveling from the lab to the galleries, and this is the piece now in the gallery, and it looks really beautiful, and I'm really satisfied with the outcome on that. The last sort of things that I wanted to finish up with are the workshops and conferences I was able to attend. The Denver Art Museum is really special in that it allowed me to be a part of a conference by VOCA for time-based media at mid-sized institutions, and they were the host that year, this last year. So it was really great to be able to start off my time there getting to know people who worked closely with the time-based media collection, and was their standout example of incorporating preservation plan for the media collection, as well as maintaining media conservation within their museum as like a forefront. I also was really privileged to speak co-present on 2 presentations, one of which was about the Great Salt Lake at AIC, and the concept of that is for like a larger initiative at AIC to highlight the local and significant ecological resilience concerns within a host city that we are going to be in as a conference, and then discuss their relation to cultural heritage and broader regional adaptation strategies. We hope that this will continue going forward. Finally, outreach was amazing. I had a really amazing time doing outreach, and one of those opportunities was working with elementary schools on their STEM nights. Well, it's called STEAM nights because we added arts, but their STEM nights, and bringing art conservation to children and pathways of understanding the art museum beyond the artwork they come into contact with, and see it more as a complex and dynamic environment. Finally, oh no, it's all shutting down. I want to thank my family. I want to thank everyone here. I want to thank all the other graduates. I want to thank Denver Art Museum, everybody. Seriously, the computer's updating right now. So, I thank my family, my mom and my dad who are here. I love you so much. Thank you. And all the teachers, staff here, Juan, thank you for coming up now and looking at the computer. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask.
I think we've all been there with computers doing bad things when we need them the most. So I just want to say congratulations, and also that it's super cool that you can play with video games as part of your preservation and conservation process. That's super great. Are there any questions? Oh, a whole bunch of hands went up.
Fun. Hi, Elisse. Amazing job. Congratulations. I have a kind of an annoying philosophical question, so we can talk about it later. But
or we could, yeah.
Or we can talk about it right now.
Yeah.
In condition checking and writing examination reports for video games, like there kind of seems like an infinite number of possibilities and an infinite number of actions that you can take while playing a video game.
Right.
When do you kind of decide that you've gathered enough information and that I don't know, I feel like I just never want to stop playing because what if I go over here behind this rock, there might be something I need to record there. How do you structure your time in those examination processes?
Well, thankfully for the artworks that I had come in contact with video games, the artist had already written out what should happen and what they felt like was going to be the functionality of the game and how it should be used. But that's a really good question when it comes to something like Zelda. Here you have so many options, or Animal Crossing. Come on now, you have a lot.
I may or may not have been thinking about Zelda. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. you have a lot of options. So I think that is a great philosophical question that I'd like to talk to you more about off stage, but also I think that we are detail-oriented people as our conservators, and so sometimes we can go a bit too far with what we do. So I think it's more of a generalization that needs to happen. But also there's an idea of like maybe it can be an iteration report where you just add on to it and add on to it, and more you find out about it. So it can be something like that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can take another question because the computer's still updated.
It's still up there.
Congratulations on a great presentation. I was absolutely wowed because most of the technologies and programs you talked about, I had no idea what they were. And that is my next question. You mentioned that you go to, for your video games, you were talking about how you follow threads, or where do you go to find out about these technologies or programs that we don't learn about that in school? Like, this is something that's incredible because you've probably learned along the way and is so specific. Some of it may be obsolete, may have been created just by one person who only knows how he programmed that. Where do you go to figure out what you are looking at or what is going on?
To be perfectly honest, I found that all of conservation right now, as it's coming into the fore, as we're coming out of school, and the more people that are coming out of school are being a lot more open about what they do and how they use treatment-wise. But I found that with time-based media specifically, they're very open about how they use. So there's a wealth of information when it comes to the internet. People who are constantly on the internet have a wealth of information when it comes to especially like things like video games, or working with older physical components when it comes to like media, like CRTs or monitors and things like that, and computers. Reddit is amazing. I love using Reddit to ask questions and going on like our CRT games or things like that, as well as just like there's just a real big, like I said, openness to to treatment and of time-based media when it comes to knowing people who are in, it's already a small, like we're in a small group of people, but then if you get to time-based media, it's even kind of smaller. So using like AIC, like Electronic Media Group, is really great as well. And they're wonderful. And honestly, everyone's just so open about wanting to share. And as soon as you say, hey, I'm working on this old thing, there's like a light in everyone's eye that just goes, what? I knew I had that back when it was 1980 something. And you're like, okay, great. Tell me more about it, or tell me how you fixed it, or yeah. So yeah.
Is there another question? It's still updating.
Congratulations, Elisse. Loved it.
Thank you.
My question is regarding the hardware, the chips, the motherboards, and things of that sort. From a conservator's point of view, how much of the electrical engineering, all that stuff, do we need to get into to be able to do a preservation and conservation treatment or considerations?
Right. Honestly, I think that they're just, for me, I found that just knowing the safety basics of like how to not electrocute myself when working on these pieces was just kind of beneficial for me, because the majority of the time, if I'm being honest, when it comes to treatment, like hands-on treatment, it would be more of a dusting sort of situation. If you start to see like corrosion occur to those motherboards, and it's something that's not just like able to be taken off and safely, I would say that's another thing that's such a big part of time-based media, is this collaboration idea. Working with people who are professionals is something that's very important and should not be felt like, sometimes I know that you can feel like, oh, I'm not really doing my job anymore. I'm just letting someone else do it for me, and are they doing it the right way? I find that within time-based media, it's really important to kind of let go of that a lot and be like, hey, I'm not the professional. I don't know how much damage I'm gonna do to this. If I can reach out, talk to people, put me in contact with someone who is a professional, it's much better off that way. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
Thanks. So really, it's a collaborative venture. Thank you.
Yes.
Second question, seeing as we have another 20% to go.
Yes.
You mentioned cathode ray tubes, CRTs, and when the artist was designing, that is what was available.
Right.
Now that things have changed and we have all these different types of I guess, displays, how does the artist, if living, accommodate that? What kind of interactions does the conservation or the conservation team have with the artist to be able to replicate the work?
Well, yeah, that's where like emulation comes into play. If you want to be able to talk with the artist kind of as soon as possible as the piece comes in, so you kind of know what their ramifications are when it comes to how they see the art, like how they see it functioning, what they see as the artwork itself, whether they see it as just the video that's being displayed, or whether they see it as the CRT as a whole, like part of their artwork, whether they like it's a sculpture or something like that, becomes really important to do as soon as possible. If they say that that's the case, that they feel that it's really important that they keep the CRT going and that sort of thing, you want to start looking for possible backups and replacements. And CRTs are kind of interesting in that they've become much more popular, but still pretty hard to find when it comes to eBay. But I don't know how to say it. It's like Nam June Paik has really revitalized the idea of wanting to kind of keep these artworks alive when it comes to CRT specifically. So they're working in Germany with the foundation to kind of keep the CRTs, his models and his makes, continuously coming out or continuously alive in that way. But if an artist says that it's just the file is fine, you can find if it's a digital artwork and they're just like, there's not a dedicated computer of some sort for it, that you have to find another computer that's exactly the same, sometimes not. Sometimes if you're lucky, you can run a Windows 7 on a different model or make. Sometimes you can't. But if you're lucky enough, you can actually use different computers or emulate it, maybe even using something called a Raspberry Pi. And, that's a mini computer itself, and you can kind of, you can work around it. But it's really important to stay in communication with the artist and see how they feel about what that is for them. That's a really long answer, I'm sorry. But I wanted to take up the most time possible because, yay, the computer's back on.
Congratulations.
I know that spinning wheel, right? Sometimes computer update, you don't know when it's going to update, and it's sometimes very difficult to know when it's going to acting up. So if you need to stand up and stretch, please do so. It's still spinning. Elisse, phone? It's still spinning. It's spinning.
like Jean said, the rainbow wheel is thinking. So we'll give it another 2-3 minutes. In the meantime, please take a little break.
Try to see my computer. I'm gonna disconnect this. Yeah. But a different computer, so I need to. So for temporary, I need to come back and check to see how they work. But at least we can have Elly, Daniela. Oh, someone's okay. I don't know what might be Elisse's. I'm going to temporarily change the computer and now try to fix that one because the next speaker also is on that computer. I'm temporarily download from the internet. So I'm going to, if everyone can come back and we'll start. We'll just maybe wait a couple minutes for everyone to come back to the recital hall. They're not still using the iPad. All right, I'm Juan Chen. I teach conservation imaging at the department, and it's my pleasure to introduce our next presenter, Daniela Gonzalez-Pruitt. Daniela earned a BA in art history with minors in Italian and studio art from the University of Toronto. Before starting her graduate studies, she was a conservation technician at LA Art Lab and the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures in Los Angeles. She was a Getty Multicultural Undergraduate intern at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art and was a conservation intern at the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto. During her graduate studies at Buffalo State, Daniela completed 2 summer internships, first at the Dallas Museum of Art in Dallas, Texas, and then the Prado Museum in Madrid in Spain. For the past year, Daniela intern in paintings conservation at the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore, Maryland. During this time, she also returned to the Prado Museum in Madrid for her 20-day option. This fall, Daniela will be rejoining the Paintings Conservation Department at the Dallas Museum of Art as the Conserving Canvas Paintings Conservation Fellow. Daniela, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, good morning again and thank you for being here y gracias a todos que me están apoyando en línea desde España. Thank you, Juan, also for that introduction. Today I will be sharing a bit about my year at the Walters Art Museum and the Museo Nacional del Prado. I will first be sharing about my 3-month-long summer internship I completed at the Prado Museum. Then I will be covering about the 10 months I spent at the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore. And then I will be also coming back to the Prado Museum where I spent 2 months this summer, again doing another internship. Last summer, I spent 3 months at the Prado Museum. The Prado Museum is located in Madrid, Spain. It was inaugurated in 1819 and originally intended as a natural history museum before it became a premier art institution. It houses an extensive collection of European art, including masterpieces by Velázquez, Goya, and El Greco. The conservation labs at the Prado Museum were established in 1928. These labs are created to address the needs for preserving and restoring the museum's extensive and valuable art collection. The Prado has 5 specialty labs, and they have a permanent staff of over 15 paintings conservators, contractors, and interns, all working collaboratively on upcoming exhibitions. Here, pictured in this image, is some of our permanent staff, interns, and contractors that were working with me during my first summer. Located all the way to the right is Enrique, the head of the lab. During my internship at the Prado, I had the great opportunity to work with Álvaro Fernández, a restorer of paintings, José de la Fuente, a restorer for any type of support over painting but mastering in wood, and María López Villarrejo, also a restorer in paintings. My time at the Prado was really special. I had the unique opportunity to cross paths with 3 of the really talented conservation fellows pictured here, Beatriz Oliver Lopez, Elissa Bronti Marquio, and Paula Fernandez Escribano. They were incredibly kind to me during my summer and introduced me to the traditional techniques they learned throughout their studies and the different programs they learned both in Rome, Valencia, and in Madrid. I spent 3 months with them. Beatriz was the fellow for frames, Elissa for European paintings, and Paula for 19th century paintings. I will be highlighting the work I completed on 3 different exhibitions that summer. De Espejo Perdido is the one that I will be talking about today. It translates to The Lost Mare, Jews and Converts in Medieval Spain. The exhibition I worked on was really special to me because it involved very involved projects that I felt really special to be a part of. It demanded collaborative efforts in many departments and open group conversations among colleagues for deciding appropriate treatment plans. I will also going a bit into the project I worked on with José de la Fuente on Ages of Splendor, which was part of the permanent collection at the Prado that was traveling to Shanghai. So right here are 2 of the panels I worked on. The following works are San Joaquín y Santa Ana expulsados del templo and Jesús entre los doctores. These are 2 works by Nicolás Ortiga. These 2 panels are about the size of your large fridge without the freezer below, so they were quite large. They are from the Colegiata de Santa María, ubicada en Borja, and these were really special because they were part of 15 monumental panel works that were part of a large altarpiece in this church when it was initially founded. They are no longer in the church because they were changed out later. However, these works were lent to the Prado for this exhibition, El Espejo Perdido, as exceptional examples of Spanish Gothic art depicting Judaic compositions. This exhibition was led by John Molina. The works are now primarily housed in the Museo de la Colarguita de Borja. Seen to the left is the grand altarpiece, the Tabla de la Virgen del Niño con la Colarguita de Borja. It is now housed with the rest of the panels in this museum. So 2 out of the 15 panels were selected to be brought back to the Prado. I will be talking specifically about San Joaquin y Santa Ana Expulsados del Templo for this presentation. This panel was examined and found to be in excellent structural condition. It presented minor to severe aesthetic issues. The most significant, though, was the intentional defacing of the figures seen here in the form of deep scratches in the eyes and mouth. Unfortunately, this defacing of these works was not uncommon due to anti-Semitic fueled views. There was also damage to the gilding due to the abrasion and possible overcleaning, historic restoration fills, and in-painting that hadn't aged well, and caused the composition to appear disjointed and distracted from the original work. Before outlining treatment proposals, we had various meetings, open conversations amongst conservators, scholars, and stewards of these works to decide on the conservative treatment plan. Because these 2 panels were also part of a larger series, we needed to take into account that they would need to be replicable so that if the next panels were chosen to be selected for treatment, we would be able to make them all a harmonious treatment. And so that they could all be exhibited in the future together. It was decided that the prior historic campaigns would not be removed, but improved upon to unify the composition, and areas of complete loss would be improved, and they would be modeled off to the 16th century campaigns from which there was the most significant evidence, as you can see in all the imaging and X-radiography that was done by Laura Alba, our scientist. The steps I completed on these panels included aqueous surface cleaning to remove surface dirt and grime. It was decided that the varnish was stable and would not be removed, but could serve as an isolating layer to perform fills. There was a lot of consideration that went into the selection of the materials that were used during this treatment. As you can see here, I am going into the filling stages. During the filling stages, I used a traditional gesso recipe. Something that was really exciting about the Prado was really delving into the traditional methods and techniques they use there. As you can see, the gesso is usually put in your palm and warmed by the palm of your hand. It is not warmed up in a double boiler system to make sure that the bonds of your gesso stay and they are not harmed during that reheating process. There are many different gesso recipes, but at the Prado, they traditionally use the calcium carbonate with a small animal glue, usually a cola de conejo, which is a rabbit skin glue. So after all the filling was done, there was something I wish I had done, that I had toned that gesso. It was something I had done in the past. And unfortunately, when it came to completing all my watercolor bases, it felt like it was taking quite forever, but I got through it with help and support, emotional support from my fellows. But after all the bases were finally done, the panels were then varnished with Damara natural resin. At the Prado, natural resin varnishes are used. We make them by hand by selecting the finest of Damar stones. The rocks are then filtered many, many times to make sure that it is a pure varnish. Aesthetic compensation was then done with Gamblin and conservation colors and my Mary. This project was quite challenging because it did have a really strict timeline. It needed to be done in a certain amount of time to meet the photography for the catalog, so I was working at both paintings at the same time. I was trying to make sure that I could get it done, and I had a really nice working relationship with the curator who came to check on me to see how I was doing that. In the end, the results of the treatment were successful in unifying the composition for the 2 panels to go on display. All materials and techniques were thoroughly documented in order for the same steps to be carried out on the other panels in the series. Here's a before and after, the figures of Joaquin and Santa Ana expulsados del templo. Something that was really special about this show is that I got to go back in December and see it as it opened, and it was really excited to see all the collaborative efforts come together in this exhibition and before it traveled to its next venue. I feel very grateful to have been a part of this project. I next wanted to touch on a project I did with Jose de la Fuente, who is a very special person. He is one of 7 people that specializes in panels and supports. He does the structural treatment of all panels at the Prado. So while at the Prado, I had the pleasure of working with him, but also attending his workshop on how to make climate packages. The following work I had the opportunity to assist him with is seen here. It is the Tentaciones de San Antonio Abad. It is by a follower of Harmonious Bosch, or El Bosco. And you can see the Prado also has the Bosco version, which is to the right. This panel was traveling to Shanghai, and it had a cradle that had caused it many issues in the past in forms of splits that were forming. So Maria Lopez was in charge of the preparation of the panel, removing any prior restoration that was between the joins to prepare it for its structural treatments. This was something really exciting for me because I had never done structural works on panel. So I assisted with this the plan was to remove the cradle since the cradle was doing harm to the work and it needed to be able to have a spring support tension system before it could travel. Working with Jose, he taught me about the different tools that he used, demonstrating them for me and how we would go about sawing through the cradle members and removing them slowly through increments, and how to properly use all the tools, not by force, but knowing how to angle them. This was really difficult for me at first. I had never had blisters like this in my life. Working with these tools, I tried to hide them from him. I didn't want to show him I was a wimp. So, but I kept going. He let me use the hammer sometimes if there was a knot. So here's a little bit about the process of removing the cradle. This took 5 days, which felt like an eternity. There was a lot of times where I'm like, I can't do this anymore, my hands. But he really supported me and helped me on the hard parts where the cradle just wouldn't budge. But in the end, we got to it and we were able to remove it. Any residue that was left from the cradle members was then removed with labanite gel. The cradle members were originally adhered with a really strong cola or animal glue, so labanite gel was really useful in removing that, softening that residue, and then it could be removed with a scalpel. So that was what I contributed to this treatment. Jose then did all the other structural treatment so that it could be ready for traveling. During my internship, I had the opportunity to visit various conservation labs and museums throughout Madrid alongside the conservation fellows. I also had a really great experience of being invited to the provinces at Albacete and Valencia to explore the hometowns of our wonderful colleague Bea Oliver, making the experience even more special. So I'm now going to be talking a bit about the Walters Art Museum, where I have spent the last 10 months, located in Baltimore. The Walters Art Museum is a really special place. It was established in 1934 following the bequest of collector William Thompson Walters and his son Henry Walters. It features a diverse collection ranging from ancient artifacts to 19th century European art, including notable works from various cultures and periods. The museum's mission to preserve and showcase the rich collection for public education and enjoyment. So during my time at the Walters, I got to spend it in the paintings lab with a wonderful team, small but mighty, Karen French and Pamela Betts. It was a really great experience with them because they included me literally in everything because we needed all hands on deck, and they really took into consideration what my interests were and really let me dive into the permanent collection to see what projects were about. And also I was involved in every exhibition that was there, and always had someone there in the lab for if I needed anything. I also had the really great opportunity to work with Nhat Ortiz, the conservation scientist, on staff. I got to work closely with her on the surveys I did and also a treatment. So it was, I'd never had worked with a conservation scientist, so this was something really great for me. While I was at the Walters, I got to assist and treat works from 4 different exhibitions. Something that was really great is that they all varied. I got to treat some Ethiopic works. I also got to treat modern art. I got to work on climate packages after training with Jose. And I also got to work on one of my passions, which is art of the Spanish Americas. Here is a bit about the works I treated while at the Walters. I did first a survey of the 4 works that are in the collection at the Walters that are of Spanish American, art of the Spanish Americas origin. 2 of them were being considered for an upcoming exhibition. The first one was a crucifixion, then the Rosa Lima. In the end, the crucifixion was not chosen. The Rosa Lima, which had already been treated and recently bought at auction, was selected. But we did do a lot of imaging and investigation to help with the Walters magazine publications that were going out for it. I also got to work on a 19th century painting. It was an emergency intervention of a portrait of Henry Walters. It was one of the most challenging pieces I've worked on. I don't know if I'm a 19th century person. And I also got to work on a really neat piece of modern art by a Senegalese artist named Yemeline Falls. I also got to finish the last part of the Fayoum project that is sponsored by the Getty. The Walters has a couple of Fayoum panel portraits. This one was on loan from Goucher College, and I worked really closely with Nhat to study it, do all the imaging and analysis, so that is now with the Getty, and anyone can be part of that open source system to investigate it. But for this talk, I will be talking a little bit about what I did with the Virgin of Guadalupe. And this is a work that was also selected for the Art of America's exhibition that is coming up. The curator is Ellen Hubler, and I had a really great time working with her. Building up to the exhibition, like I said, we looked at the other works that are part of the Arts of the Americas. We did multi-band imaging on the crucifixion, we did a lot of x-rays, and we also did a lot of material analysis with Nhat. The Virgin of Guadalupe painting was very interesting. It was donated to the collection because it came in first as a study piece, but then we really saw that it could be something really special. No one had imagined that this fragment could possibly be a piece that could go on display. To its side, you can see other images of the Virgen de Guadalupe that are in other collections and see how magnificent and iconic this work is in Mexican culture. This work had a lot of aesthetic issues, and it was really hard to see past that in order to get it for exhibition display, but I'm really happy that Ellen Hubler, the curator, was able to work with me and really trust and confide in me that we could bring this up to what could be exhibition ready. Here are a bit of the issues that were going on with it. This work, unfortunately, was unstable when we got it. It was just a fragment on canvas. It was flaking everywhere. The media was friable, so it had to be consolidated immediately. This was done with isinglass over a mica section platen. After it was stable enough, I was able to do imaging of it, and during analyzing it, we were able to see that it did not contain the 46 stars that are usually represented in the Virgin. The 46 stars of every Virgin of Guadalupe represent the constellation when Juan Diego saw the Virgin. So this virgin was quite unique because she actually did have stars, but they were turned to flowers, and we were able to see that through the x-rays and the infrared imaging. So we knew that this work had been changed or altered afterwards. With that in mind, Nhat did XRF scanning and other types of analysis in order to discern the pigments of this work. We found a lot of gold in this work, and it was quite surprising from looking at it. It didn't seem to have any gold, but that's because it had been obscured by an intervention. We don't know if it was restoration or to try to hide the gold that was initially there, but the original shell gold had been hidden by lemon yellow, and this was something that was quite interesting because we were trying to find out more about the history of it. We know that it was bought at a shop in Guadalajara, but unfortunately it is anonymous like most of these works, so we weren't sure. Something I hadn't mentioned till now is that the reverse of the work had a paper fragment. So that was my worst nightmare. I'm like, great, a paper treatment. Okay. Well, I was really lucky to have Abigail, our manuscript and book conservator, there to lead me through the way, and also Teresa in my head telling me everything I did through my first year. So I removed the fragment successfully, and it was preserved, and it's in a Mylar sleeve, and it was really exciting to analyze it using different types of imaging techniques. Unfortunately, it did not yield anything. This work had been soiled and covered in different types of grime and soot. It also had accretions all over the place. We had learned that these white accretions were later found to be phosphorus, and a lot of places where these works are displayed usually are open to the air, and it's actually bat guano that is found to be on that surface that creates those accretions. I used different types of aqueous cleaning systems through the MCP to work with cleaning this painting, and I was successful in doing that, and it took a bit, but finally those phosphorus spots did finally go away. This work also had a lot of areas that were not present in the canvas. They were lost in the original support. It was a fragment that was cut down from its original format. So I was really excited to use a technique I learned at the DMA, which is thread-by-thread tear mending. So I used this to make inserts. And here you can see before where there were areas of loss in the primary support, the canvas of this fragment. And after, you can see where I made inserts to better bring this painting to a square format so that it could be better displayed. This painting was a fragment, so it needed to have an edge lining, and it needed to also have a frame that was found for it. So I worked strategically to make these mends so that when an edge lighting was put on, they also wouldn't be pressured and come apart. In this image, you can see that it is now on a support. It was on a custom-made stretcher over paperboard to further support it, and it has an edge lighting. Because of the frame that was selected for it, the painting was stretched to a larger fit stretcher that fit the frame, not the painting, because the frame could not be cut down because it was an original frame from the collection that was selected because it had Spanish colonial type decor. So in this project, I was a lot smarter and thought back to the Prado, so I did use tone gesso. I used a tone gesso for my fills that made my in-painting a lot easier. It is almost undiscernible. It was really nice when it came to the in-painting. It made everything go a lot smoother and enjoyable. So as you can see here is the before treatment and after. I worked really closely with Ellen Huber to go about aesthetically how we would bring this piece back in terms of my in-painting. I stayed only within the composition in all areas of paint loss. I did not go into innovating or reimagining that area, even though we did have images based off our x-rays to know what it would have looked like. I was very excited to work on this piece. I think it was quite a change from where it started, and I'm really excited for it to be a part of this upcoming exhibition. I also got to go to the conservation window and share a bit about this piece there with visitors. I worked in the conservation window and was really excited for people to ask me more about conservation and the materials we use. So this is part 2 of my second summer at the Prado. I was really lucky to have the Walters allow me go back to the Prado. While at the Prado, I got to work with Alvaro again, and I worked on an enconchado and a florero. This was a piece by John Brugger the Elder, a Flemish painter renowned for his detailed and vibrant flowers and still lifes. As you can see, the Prado has a lot of works by this artist in its permanent collection. Selected for its upcoming show by Alejandro Vergara and a botanist named Eduardo Hernandez, this work was interesting because it was part of a pair, and it had several issues that I was interested in treating in it. It also had possible canvas extensions, so this work was something we had to collaborate with the curator to know if we would be allowed to look into those possible canvas extensions. We theorized that the original dimensions of this work were a smaller format. This is a bit into removing the oxidized varnish, a reduction of that, and afterwards the previous campaigns of restoration I found below. I worked with Laura Alba to investigate into the additions. We found that the additions were added on. They were not true to the work. Through X-radiography, there were actually 3 additions. After the varnish reduction was done, watercolor bases were added and it was varnished. The work was then removed from its stretcher, and then its tacks were taken out, and the gotcha folder edges were then coaxed to remove it. This was the part where the lining was taken back and the additions were then removed from the painting. This is a little bit into the process of removing the lining. It was a gotcha adhesive that was used for this lining. After the lining was removed, adhesive residues were removed with lapinate. The work was stretched on a new customized stretcher. And then after it was restored to its original format, it was just in painting. I had 4 days to complete this treatment because it was at the end of my internship, so this was all that was going through my head. And this was it afterwards, and it was a really enjoyable treatment in the end, and I'm really happy I got to be a part of it. And this is me posing with the additions that are in a mylar sleeve like a WWE championship belt. So I got to travel to a couple more places this summer, and that was something that I really enjoyed with the same group of fellows I met last summer. And I just would like to thank everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for a really entertaining talk that took us to many places. I was just curious, you said you had to do an emergency intervention on the portrait, and I wanted to know more about what was the emergency.
Yeah, so when we went into storage, there was a painting that was hanging, and we pulled it out to look at it and then put it back in. And then when we looked at it, like 5 minutes later, it was revealed that there was another painting underneath it that no one had known about. The first part of that painting had been stitched to another canvas, and those stitches had fallen out. So it was really neat in the end. We used a magnetized system because we did not stitch it back to the painting that was below it to try to adhere that top to the back of that painting. And it was a really involved treatment dealing with what artists can be seen as a little stingy during that time in the 19th century. So it was a really great intervention, but it was not able to be treated at that point because it needed a lot more time to go into it, but we're happy that it's stable now and it is back in the Long Museum storage.
Thank you. That was really entertaining as well. I was curious about the cradle removal and the front of the painting, and I was just wondering, as you're doing all the work on the back, how did the front go, or were there any worries or considerations for that?
So usually, that's a good question. A painting won't be faced when you're doing work because you need to be able to look at it. We are working on a surface that's always clean because it is face down. Sometimes the joins can be faced if there is paint that may flake at that point. But otherwise, we are just always making sure that our workspace is clean at all points, and we're checking on the painting to make sure that it is doing fine from the front.
Hi, I just have a question about the second time you used the tone gesso, because the first time you used it in the palm of your hand, but when it was toned, what was your setup for that?
Yeah, so there's different people that prefer it. My supervisor at the Walters Pan Beds actually uses it in her hand too. I used pigments. I used red earth pigments and a couple other pigments that I just didn't want to be involved putting them on my bare hand, so I preferred using them out of a jar.
And that kept it warm enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
Keep going, and if you have more questions, then I'll be here and doing a break and some next question. Since we already kind of delayed, and so we're gonna break now and come back here at 11. No, you did not go over. It's okay. Totally fine. That's fine. Totally fine.
No, it was our delay first.
Yeah. Don't worry. No, don't worry. Don't worry. Yeah. Don't worry. Okay, so it's okay. Okay. So let's just make sure I.
It's next.
Okay. Let's move these away so you don't have to worry about them. Okay. That's work, right? Yeah, that's not cutting, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because it's always set out okay for this computer, just like some
I know. It's okay, it happens. At least it happened at the end of the
I
presentation.
know.
Oh my god.
I know.
But it's okay.
Yeah.
Also, can I upload my new PowerPoint?
Sure.
I
Yeah.
made some
Okay.
changes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna go do that. On there now.
You can see that afternoon one is in the different
Okay.
folder.
Yeah, I'll delete it and replace
And
it.
make sure you're okay to
Yeah.
open them. You have afternoon if you want to do it.
Yeah. I'm probably gonna come right after we take the group picture and open it so all the videos are loaded. Thank you.
me again. And hope the computer will behave from now on. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our next presenter, Elly Stewart Davis. Elly graduated from the University of Tulsa with a BA in art history, where she earned academic awards for excellence in art history and scholarship. She has held pre-program internships in objects conservation labs at the Gilchrist Museum of Art in Tulsa, the Cleveland Museum of Art, and the Art Institute Chicago. Elly served as the co-class representative and spent her third-year internship in object conservation at the Michael C. Carlos Museum at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Elly just moved back to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where she will begin her new position as the assistant object conservator at the Gilchrist Museum of Art. Let's welcome Elly.
Thanks, Nguyen. Put my water somewhere that I'm probably not going to use. Okay. All right, so good morning, everyone. Again, thank you, Nguyen, for the introduction. My third year was spent at the Michael C. Carlos Museum in Atlanta, Georgia. And as most of you are probably aware, it's like insanely hot down there, but of course, conservation labs are always frigid. So the Carlos Collection was established in 1876 and has been located on the Emory University's main campus since 1985. The collection features over 25,000 works, mostly ancient, from Greece, Rome, Egypt, the Near East, Africa, and the Americas. But I wanted to start out with a little background as to why I chose the Carlos. We all have our stories about how we found conservation, and the Carlos is where I found it in 2015. I was living in Atlanta, I was working as a bartender, and I happened to find a Groupon for a discounted admission. Which it's $8 to get in, so I don't know why it was any more discounted than that, but you know. So on one of my days off, I was walking through the galleries listening to the audio guide where a woman was talking about their research on objects in the collection. And lo and behold, I bumped into the very woman who was speaking in my ears, who was Renee Stein. She was writing on a clipboard, looking in a case, and I asked her what she was doing, where she told me something that I didn't understand it at all. I have no idea what she was saying. Probably something about data loggers. But my takeaway was that she gets to touch these things and get paid to do it. So I was hooked. I immediately went home and Googled everything I could find about conservators and how to be one, and enrolled myself in art history classes. So 8 years later, when it came to choosing my third year placement, it was a no-brainer for me. I wanted to work for Renee. The Conservation Lab was established in 1993 after a museum expansion with Therese O'Gorman as the first permanent conservator. The lab consisted of just the room that you can see here on the left, with the room on the right serving as the works on paper storage at the time. The current lab setup was established in 1999 when Renee was hired to conserve a new acquisition of 145 objects from the Niagara Falls Museum, which included several mummies and coffins. And to accommodate the coffins in the lab, the works on paper storage area was commandeered and just never returned. So fun fact though, one of those mummies was identified as Ramses I and was repatriated to Egypt in 2003, where it is on display today. Renee succeeded Therese as the Director of Conservation and is now joined by Assistant Conservator Brittany Deneen and a rotating position of Mellon Fellows, including the current fellow Ella Andrews. And before you ask, yes, having an Elly and an Ella in the lab at the same time did get confusing, especially because we also looked a lot alike before I cut my hair back off, so. So even though the lab is very exhibition driven, I was given the opportunity to work on any and all materials that I wanted outside of the set objects slotted for display. During my time at the Carlos, I was fortunate enough to work on a wide range of objects with varying treatment needs, including Egyptian bronzes, basketry, ceramics, cartonnage, faience, and even painted textiles. But for the sake of time, I'll only be discussing 3 of the more major treatments today. Starting with this enormous project, which was carried out over my entire year at the Carlos. This is a 19th century Jane pilgrimage map on canvas, painted with relatively underbound pigments in gum arabic, and is 8.5 by 11 feet. This map depicts a still very active pilgrimage site in India known as Shatranjay. This is one of the most important holy sites for the Jain religion, which is a sect of Hinduism. So this treatment was the most collaborative project of the year. All of us in the lab had our hands on every aspect while working with several contract conservators, lab volunteers, pre-program interns, scholars, and of course, curators, exhibition designers, mount makers, as well as the Carlos social media team. So onto the treatment. This map was encased in silk borders that were in awful condition, as you can see here. They were shattered and had several layers of different colored silk underneath each corner patch, indicating that they had been replaced many times. The map was also backed with a large red cotton backing cloth that was pretty crispy. So the borders were suspected to be too small for the painting, causing many sharp creases to develop, with the worst being in the corners. It was also stored folded up like a comforter in storage for several years, so folds carried throughout the entire work. I started working on this map shortly after my arrival at the Carlos in last August, where I began with the identification of a dozen or so pigments with X-ray fluorescence and mounted pigment samples for polarized light microscopy. And I just wanted to throw in here real quick, my favorite discovery among the many rare pigments was that all of this yellow was, Indian yellow. So Indian yellow is a now outlawed pigment that is created by feeding cows nothing but mango leaves and condensing their urine into a dry pigment. And the way we know that this pigment is in fact Indian yellow is that when you expose it to ultraviolet radiation, the yellow absolutely just lights up the room. It's my favorite, like party trick, you know. But anyways, so I also released the borders and the backing from the painting with help from our amazing group of lab volunteers who have been volunteering for the Carlos almost longer than I have been alive. So they were an amazing group. After the backing was removed, as a team, we humidified and flattened the entire map on view to the public in our pop-up lab. We borrowed the works on paper, again, gallery space, between exhibitions when we needed to work on the map as a whole, because the map was so enormous that it didn't actually fit in our lab. So on the floor of this gallery was the only place that we could unroll it completely. We humidified in 3 sections with a typical packet of damp blotters, Hollytex, Sympatex, and Dartex on top. And then we weighted it under folding tables, as you can see here on the right, with my beloved Renee for scale. We did not have enough plexi or weights to cover the whole map, so a flat layer of whole sheets of blue board were placed over Hollytex with dry blotters underneath the map, and then folding tables as our weight. We added as many packing blankets as we could find for extra weight and left it for a few days. And I think how well this actually worked surprised all of us. It was great. The major sharp creases in the corners were significantly reduced, with the worst of the folds also flattened. So once it was sufficiently dry, we rolled the map onto 10-foot long tubes after consulting with local paintings conservator and Buffalo alum, Larry Schutz, so that we could take the map back to the lab to continuous treatment. And once back in the lab, we worked in sections, utilizing what we lovingly called our Torah system. We were able to unroll the map for more localized flattening and as well as consolidation. Then we were able to roll it onto another tube on the other side of the table so that we could slowly finish the whole map in manageable sections like a Torah. For those of you unfamiliar with Jainism, Jains are pacifists, with their monks being known for carrying brooms so that they may brush away the insects from their walking paths, as all life is sacred. It's because of this that the decision was made to use seaweed-based adhesive known as Funori as our consolidant, to keep in line with their beliefs rather than using an animal product such as gelatin, for example. The Funori was applied by brush over the entire map by hand. And I'd like to take a second here to note that since we are a lab of 4 objects conservators, there's no paintings or anything like that, we collaborated with many experts throughout this entire treatment of this map, including Larry, the paintings conservator that I just mentioned, textile conservator Howard Sutcliffe to wash the backing and stabilize the borders, paper conservator Liz Schulte, who specializes in Indian miniatures to aid in our consolidation and flattening efforts, as well as an Emory Jain scholar who is researching this map and the holy site for its upcoming exhibition. And of course, our 2 pre-program interns, Lilith Ragsdale and Andy Koo, who are a massive help with our consolidation efforts. But I just want to say, be honest though, how many of you thought that that was Daisy and Josephine? It's literally, they're twins. Yeah, she was your twin. It was crazy. And towards the end of my year, we were able to take a field trip to the Jain Temple of Atlanta to view the representation of the Shatranjay pilgrimage site. For those who are unable to travel to India to complete the pilgrimage themselves, these maps are used to take the journey mentally, which allows one to essentially gain good karma in order to one day achieve enlightenment. And you can see on the right here, this little, I forgot to circle it, but you can see one of the little brooms that the monks used to brush the bugs. Anyways. So here are the 2 representations together. It was really exciting to be able to see another version of this site after having spent the last year of my life studying ours. During my last week at the Carlos, Howard Sutcliffe returned with the cleaned backing and stabilized borders and spent a few days back up in the gallery, stitching them back in place, completing the treatment. I feel so fortunate to have been able to see this treatment through from beginning to end and have learned so much along the way and how to have a really big object in a small space. So up next, this is an Egyptian New Year's flask made from faience. Faience is a type of self-glazing ceramic made from quartz, alkaline salts, lime, and copper inclusions to create this blue color. This type of flask was made to collect Nile water and given as an offering to the gods to celebrate the new year. The flask came into the lab with extensive dark staining, as you can see in the before images. This condition was not legible as faience, with only a small area of the blue surrounding the crack resembling, a little dino nugget. It was also missing the remainder of the rim, as well as the two side pieces at the base of the neck that we believed were small handles. I started out by removing the staining that was deeply embedded in the body with a 0.5 citrate solution that was pH adjusted to 8.5 with sodium hydroxide to avoid etching the surface. After a few test spots, I got incredibly lucky, and this gentle solution proved to be extremely effective. So I proceeded with making a 2% agarose gel poultice with this solution. My first round of gel poultice, I poured the gel on the flask while it was still warm and had just started to set up. However, I acted a little slow and it came out super lumpy, solidifying faster than I anticipated. So it looks gross, but it worked. But as you can see, it worked really, really well, removing a ton of staining. After a few rounds of poultice and rinsing with water, the original blue of the flask was much more legible as faience. So after the flask was sufficiently clean, I moved on to the replacements. While searching for existing New Year's flasks in other collections, I discovered that the neck was actually meant to flare out in the style of a lotus flower, which was confirmed with a slight flare at the edge of the break edge, or the end of the break edge, as you can see here. Now, if you know me, you know I have a thing for 3D printing for conservation, so of course I had to 3D print the flared rim. I used my favorite free iPhone app, Metascan, to make a 3D model of the lab. This app utilizes a series of around 300 photographs of the flask taken from all angles and compiles them into a digital model that can be manipulated in any 3D modeling software. I use Blender, which is also free. I then compared the flask to several existing flasks from other museum collections and chose one from the Louvre that displayed the most similar neck height to body ratio, bringing an image of the Louvre flask into Blender, and then I digitally sculpted the flare with the Carlos flask overlaid to match the proportions of the reference flask. As seen in the wire mesh here, I used the existing break edge as a guide to where the flare began. I then 3D printed the piece, which took about 2 hours, made a mold of it, cast it in plaster, and then I carved out the bottom of the plaster by hand to fit the break edge and adhered it to the flask with B72 bulked with microballoons. So in the beginning research phase of this treatment, while looking for similar flasks in other collections, I realized that what I thought were little handles were not actually handles, but were seated baboons. Baboons are a recurring theme within ancient Egyptian culture, representing the sun and the new year. Which makes sense because this is a New Year's flask. So I attempted to digitally sculpt them inside of Blender, but I soon realized that the amount of time I was taking to sculpt the baboons in the software was similar to just doing it by hand. I also realized that my 3D printer was not capable of the level of detail needed in such a small piece. Once they were printed, a lot of time would have been required to fill and sand the print lines before taking a mold of them, as the 3D printed plastic cannot be adhered directly to the object. I just wanted to note, though, that the resolution issues for objects of this size are not a limitation for all 3D printers, but it was for mine. So I switched gears and decided to hand make the baboons out of polymer clay, which I then made a mold and cast 2 copies in a 2-part epoxy called epoxy with an A. This epoxy is commonly used for mount making and is inert and is deemed safe to be in contact with objects. I then refined them to fit their specific break edges and adhered them again with B72 bulked with microballoons. After the final shaping, the fills were toned to match with dry pigments in golden super matte acrylic medium. I'm pretty sure, though, that this will remain the most dramatic before and after for many, many years, if not the rest of my career. And my piece de resistance for of the year, this is a Greek black figure kylix known as a Little Master lip cup. This is a shallow drinking cup with an inscription on the side which translates to "drink and be merry." Humans never change. This cup came into the collection having extensive old repairs which had failed in transit after its acquisition. When it came into the lab, the cup was disassembled, cleaned of its old repairs, and reassembled into this state seen on the right by another Buffalo alum, Caitlin Wright, who was the Mellon Fellow at the Carlos at the time. After completing these fills, her fellowship came to a close, so it was in this state in which I picked up the project. After conversations with curator Dr. Ruth Allen, it was decided that this cup wasn't easily legible as a stemmed cup without a stem. And because I wanted more experience with creating fills for ceramics, I was given the go-ahead to bring this cup back to its original state. So it wouldn't be a project of mine if I didn't throw a little 3D at it, of course. So here you can see another lip cup from the same maker, actually, in the Met's collection, showcasing the foot here that the Carlos cup should have. And after discussions with Dr. Allen, I 3D scanned the Carlos cup with Metascan and used the existing example to overlay my model on top of and create a new foot digitally. On the bottom here is the wire mesh of the foot that I created, and then with a more rendered out model on the right, custom designed to ensure a perfect fit to the underside of the Carlos cup. I presented this rendering for 3 separate foot styles from existing comparanda so that Dr. Allen could decide which foot she believed fit the cup best. But I ended up just 3D printing all 3 options so that she could handle them and make a more informed decision with this cup in hand. When people ask me if 3D printing for conservation is worth the effort, this is usually the example that I use. There's no way I would have been able to create 3 separate feet like this by hand in the few hours that it took me to model and print them. But anyways, once the decision was made, I filled and sanded the print lines with Pfluger and then made a 2-part silicone mold of the chosen foot and cast it in plaster. I used a similar technique for addressing the large missing side of the cup as well as the handle, with one notable difference of casting the plaster fill in place rather than pouring it as a separate piece. I'm going to explain this process in just a second, but I wanted to take a minute to say that although I'm obviously a huge proponent of 3D printing for loss compensation, throughout this year I have gained a ton of valuable experience, allowing me to understand when 3D printing is helpful and a time saver and when it's more trouble than it's worth. And although this process was ultimately successful, largely due to the fact that I happen to be married to a guy who 3D stuffs for a living, anyways, this portion of the treatment took several months to get right, and I probably wouldn't do the same way again. With that being said, I began by taking the 3D model of the cup that I had made for the foot replacement and printed half of it. Although this sounds simple, this was absolutely the crux. Modeling a brand new piece by hand is generally pretty simple. However, trying to take an existing half of a handmade cup and make that side fit into a missing space that's not actually as perfectly round as it looks was absolutely not simple. So a lot of minute adjustments were made to the overly complicated photogrammetric model by hand to make this fit flush, and I almost gave up a bunch of times, but alas, we made it through. So here up in the top left corner, you can see that the 3D printed copy after I filled and sanded the print lines so that they wouldn't translate to the mold, and I made a 2-part silicone mold from it, which is the turquoise bits up here. My goal was to pour the plaster into the mold with the cup inside of it to reduce the need for further handling during the fitting and refining process, as you can see here and here. This is how the cup set inside of the mold before pouring the plaster. After placing the cup inside the mold with a parafilm barrier layer, I poured the plaster and allowed it to set for a few days. When I opened the mold, I was able to separate the fill from the cup and remove the parafilm. This revealed a perfectly fit fill to the break edge, right, that required minimal further adjustment. I adhered the fill in place with B72 so that it can be removed in the future if necessary. And not pictured on the slide, the existing handle on the cup was also replicated in 3D, printed, molded, and cast in plaster in the same manner as the foot. So due to the cup's incredibly thin walls and a thicker interior top rim, as well as the sheer size of the loss, traditional methods such as creating a wax dam were impractical and definitely imperfect. And although the 3D aspect of this part of the project was difficult, I stand by my belief that the results were likely far better than I could have achieved manually. And a significant portion of my time of this process was also dedicated to experimenting with various types of plaster and strengthening agents. The delicate nature of the fills made it challenging to remove them from the molds without breaking them. Therefore, I spent several weeks preparing test batches of plaster with different adhesive mixed in, testing their strengths, aiming to pre-consolidate the fills for easier removal from the molds. I landed on a recipe of a 1-part 10% PVOH, 5 parts water, and 8 parts pottery plaster. It worked well, but I'm sure that there's a better method out there that I wasn't able to nail down, and I'd love to continue experimenting with these different plaster types, but with deadlines looming, I was happy with the choice that I made. Finally, all fills were in place and ready to be toned. Then through some insane twist of fate, 2 fragments were found in storage that were incorrectly numbered, and lo and behold, they were the 2 missing pieces that completed the cup. So, of course, because we never make permanent changes, I removed the fill with no problems and fit the 2 previously lost pieces in place and recast yet another handle. Thankfully, I saved the molds. So. Once everything was in place, the fills were toned to match with golden acrylics mixed with golden super matte medium to create fills that were color matched to avoid distraction from the cup as a whole, but also won't hide the fact that they are not original material. So here she is, all complete, ready for display. And to fill out my time at the Carlos, I did a few resume builder type activities. I presented my master's project at the annual conference for the Southeast Regional Conservation Association, or CIRCA, in Jackson, Mississippi. I presented my 615 research as a poster as well as a presentation, and gave a full talk over 3D printing for conservation at AIC in Salt Lake City. I also took a few fun workshops, including gilding and mold making. This year, I've also been serving as the assistant program chair and the virtual events coordinator for AIC's Wooden Artifacts group. And if anyone here attended any of those WAG events, thank you very much. Look forward to seeing more of those soon once my life settles down a tiny bit. But if that wasn't enough, I've also began establishing a new ECP and liaison position in Oklahoma, as I have accepted the position of assistant curator. I don't know what I do for a living. Assistant conservator of objects at the Gilcrease Museum of Art in Tulsa, starting next month. And of course, you could leave out my perfect department baby. For those of you who weren't here, I spent my whole first year of the program pregnant and had my daughter, Ayla, over the summer before my second year. We moved to Atlanta last year in time for her first birthday, where she got her first library card, and of course, we had to go peach picking. And over the last year, she's grown into a whole little person with a little bit more hair and a lot more sass. So if you see her second birthday, she was not pleased with the cake that I made her. Just kidding, she loved it. And of course, I want to take a second to thank the amazing conservation team at the Carlos, Renee, Brittany, and Ella. Thank you so much for making this year every bit of the experience that I dreamed of having. Because of you, I feel like the fully formed conservator and ready to take on anything that comes across my bench. Thank you, of course, also to the faculty and the staff of Buffalo State Conservation Department. Thank you for all of your guidance, and of course, thank you for being so incredibly flexible and understanding with me during my journey into motherhood. Thank you to the many generous funders who have made my education possible. Thank you to the class of 2024 for being the most amazing built-in best friends. I'm so incredibly lucky to have landed in this class with all of you, and I love you. I'm gonna not cry. And most importantly, I'd like to thank my incredible husband, Ben. I'm definitely gonna cry. You have taken on the insane amount of stress that comes along with loving someone in this field, and never once let your support waver. I absolutely would not be up here if it weren't for you. Sorry. And I will never be able to repay you for everything you've done and everything you've endured for me to follow my dreams. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, we prepare tissue just in case.
Good thinking.
It's fabulous.
Thank you.
Hi, Elly. Thank you for your wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Stand back in front of the microphone.
How creating Promenade was a challenge that he gave himself to weave a single piece of fiber work for each day of the week. And then he described the experience as a 7-day dash instead of a slow promenade. So even though Demarais started out as a weaver, he eventually moved on to more sculptural work. From 1970 and on, Demarais' work consisted of standalone sculptural objects with little woven elements. So Promenade is one of the few woven works produced by the artist, adding the significance to possible treatment to stabilize and preserve this important presentation of his early work. So in discussing the work itself, Demarais explained that he used undyed hand-spun wool yarns to create the main woven figures in Promenade. The colored yarns he used in the pieces were dyed with aniline dyes, and he clarified that everything else should be the colored undyed wool, except for those dyed areas. So this helped confirm that the orange discoloration apparent on the pieces is not original and has accrued from long-term display. Demara also pointed out that cotton was not part of his original material. He did not wrap the threads around the rod as seen in some of the pieces. So his input helped me formulate a treatment plan to address the issues we talked about. The treatment plan is as follows. The object will receive thorough vacuuming to remove embedded frass and casing. Overall staining will be reduced through a wet treatment, and non-original elements that were added will be removed, and weak areas will be supported by conservation-appropriate methods and materials. Okay. Low suction vacuum was used to remove the frass casing, remaining pest carcasses, as well as accumulated surface dirt. Okay, so not everything was easily picked up by the vacuum. Some pieces had to be physically removed, as seen in the video in the middle. And when the task was completed, the significant amount that was removed could be observed, as seen in the last image on the right in the paper. Following vacuuming, I conducted solubility testing on the discolored areas. Using conservation literature, I tested various solutions and adjusted the pH of the cleaning solution until a combination of a surfactant called dihypon and a chelator called trisodium citrate proved most effective in reducing the visible discoloration. And then the ratio of these materials were adjusted until it was found suitable to reduce the staining visibly. Wet cleaning is not something, a piece of this size is not something that I could have completed on my own. It required all hands on deck with extensive planning and scheduling. So with the help of everyone in the lab, I was able to wet clean all 6 pieces successfully using the listed methods of alternating between sponging and soaking. The video speeds up what is normally a 2-hour process into 30 seconds. So when wet cleaning was completed, the object was blotted with towels, and then a drying cloth is placed over it to facilitate the movement of remaining stains so that it will go into the dry cloth as opposed to moving elsewhere in the object. So while these before and after images of Promenade showed subtle changes in the appearance, there is a quantifiable way to see how much wet cleaning improved the overall condition of the object. The pH of the baths were tested at the beginning of each step, and when the average of the starting bath and the last bath was calculated, it showed that the wet cleaning was successful in removing harmful acidic materials from the object, bringing the object's pH closer to neutral. So now you may be wondering why there are only 6 on the screen when we talked about 7 at the beginning. And that's because there is a surprise waiting for me when I got to the last piece. Before wet cleaning, preliminary spot testing of the solution was conducted to determine the effectiveness of the solution and stability of the dyes. Up to this point, all the pieces were responding positively. But when we got to this piece, the surfactant and chelator affected some sort of colorant that was used on the dyed areas, and it showed that a lot of the dyes were coming off on the blotter sheet. So with the help of conservation literature and guidance from Sarah, I conducted conductivity tests, adjusted the pH of the water, added a sequestering agent, and was able to formulate a solution that allowed me to clean the area with the sensitive dyes without causing significant loss of the dye, as seen in the blotter papers in the bottom. So rather than in a bath, the pieces, this piece particularly was cleaned using a suction plan to limit the movement of the dyes when that area is wet. The process took 20 hours compared to the typical 2 hours from previous wet treatment. However, treatment proved just as successful in reducing the discoloration and limited, and what we really wanted to achieve was to limit the movement of and loss of the dyes from the dyed areas. So while the cleaning process differed from the previous 6, the result was still the same at the end of the wet cleaning, and the overall visual staining was reduced, as evident in the contaminants visible in the bath water collected. So not only did this treatment require tremendous help from everyone in the textile lab, I also enlisted help from other departments in the museum, such as consulting with wooden artifacts conservator Peggy Ollie about the wooden rods that were used in Promenade. The wooden rods exhibited the same orange staining, and the paint is sensitive to acetone ethanol. We established that a 1:1 ethanol to water ratio was suitable to clean off the staining and the grime as the first pass, since grime and staining protected the paint from the ethanol. But once the staining was removed, deionized water was used to clean the wooden rod until the swabs were clear of contaminants. Once the pieces were cleaned, I moved to addressing losses due to past damage. A large number of the threads were broken throughout the object. Some of these threads were not structurally integral and only needed minimal intervention, but there were threads that were essential to the object's structural integrity that needed to be supported so that the object could be displayed hanging as the artist originally intended. So through discussion with Bernice and Sarah, it was suggested that I try a splicing technique, often done to join yarn ends in knitting and crocheting. This method would allow me to join the ends of the broken yarn, but I was concerned about the joint itself and if it was strong enough to support the weight of the object when it was hanging. So this was a question I kind of had to think about as I made my way to New York for an ACPIG. Fortunately, it was at NACPIC that I found a solution to my problem through a presentation by UCLA Getty's fellow Taylor Brem. Taylor's presentation discussed her treatment of a figurine attached to a sled by a string. Since the string was broken, Taylor knotted Stapletex thread through the string to join them together, and that was enough to provide the support for the join. This provided me with an option to support the splice thread by knotting an additional thinner thread through it, as seen in the mock-up in the middle. When I returned to the PMA, I tested out different threads, materials, used this method, and added weight to test their strength. And through these tests, I found that cotton meddler thread, sewing thread, was found to be sufficient enough to support the weight of the object and stabilize the areas of broken yarn. So in the two image there, this method was used in areas like this where the frayed edges were spliced together to join into one continuous piece of thread, and the cotton meddler thread was knotted through to support the join. However, there were areas that had complete losses between the two broken yarns that needed loss compensation so that it could further support the object. So this issue was addressed by creating replacement threads from cotton embroidery threads. So this is a different thickness of thread from the other supporting thread that we used. And this was achieved by unwinding the cotton embroidery thread, retwisting them to match the twist and width of the original wool thread of the object. And then the replacement threads were painted with using ProFab fabric paints to match the color of the wool. So how were these threads incorporated? In this instance, I needed to reconnect this thread to the top of the rod to hold the structure of the main woven figure. The replacement threads were cut to size to compensate for the loss, wrapped around the rod, and secured with cotton meddler threads. The ends of the replacement threads were then spliced onto the wool thread, and the areas further supported by cotton meddler threads. And the majority of this work is done flat to limit the stress on the weak areas of the object. But when all the threads were stabilized to an extent, the object was hung using twill tapes, and adjustments were made according to the reference picture in the middle. As a final step in the treatment, Sarah and I wanted to have an updated image of all 7 pieces after treatment, since it was based on images from DeMare and the catalog that helped me finalize and work through my treatment process. So we called up DeMare again and confirmed the orientation of the pieces according to the catalog and worked with PMA's conservation photographer and photographed these pieces in pairs. And then our conservation photographer, Jason, would compile the images into a single image using Photoshop. So the object now has an updated photograph that best reflects the artist's original intention for the work. It is our hope that this photograph will be a great resource for future exhibition plans and treatment needs moving forward. So along with Promenade, I completed a few other treatments that I wanted to highlight during this presentation, as they not only showcase the breadth of the costumes and textiles collection, but also the range of skills I've gained from working with them. And for these next 2 objects, there are some French words that I try my best to pronounce, so be patient with me. The first is a 1920s day dress by French designer and milliner Jean Lanvin. Lanvin started her fashion house in 1889, and in the 1920s, she was best known for her robe de style dresses. Lanvin was a versatile designer, however, and created dresses to match the drop waist style of the 1920s, as evident in the day dress and the wedding ensemble we have at the PMA's collection. The purple day dress was part of my treatment list because of the detached sleeve. We wanted to find a way to reattach the sleeve and support the area of a splitting silk to improve the condition for future exhibition and study. So the treatment approach we decided for this was to create an adhesive underlay that could be reactivated and act as a support to the splitting silk, but also provide an extra layer to stitch into to reattach the sleeve. So this required multiple attempts at matching the unique purple color of the day dress. And when a match was found, the shattering pieces of the dress was realigned, the underlay was heat reactivated to hold these pieces together, and the sleeve was reattached and supported with stitching. And now the dress is in one piece, and it can be studied and prepared for any future exhibition. The next treatment I worked on was something that was in the Costumes and Textiles collection, but was not made of a typical material that would be associated with textiles, and required a collaborative effort between the objects lab and paper lab to determine a proper treatment. So this bag was designed by American designer Judith Lieber. The bag is an interpretation of a Mignarder bag or clutch that gained popularity in 1920s and 30s, and what Lieber is most known for. The bag is a part of collection that Lieber called chatelaine, and it is identifiable by its petal shape and scalloped edges, as well as her signature rhinestone decoration. The bag itself is accompanied by an original paper box. The box showed splitting at the corners of the lid and lifting up the board in some areas. Whereas the purse had excessive adhesive and adhesive staining throughout the gold surface, and also there were detached rhinestones that we wanted to reincorporate back onto the object. So working together with Casey Hamilton, a Mellon Fellow in the Objects Lab, we found that the adhesive was nitrocellulose through UV-induced visible fluorescence. And so we decided that ethanol was a good option to swell the adhesive without affecting the adhesion between the rhinestones and the purse itself. And to clean, and so the ethanol swabs were used to clean off the excessive adhesive under the microscope. And then I used Paraloid B72 to reattach the rhinestone of the bag, using what was left of the silver backing to try and match location for the rhinestones. And as for the paper box, I consulted with paper conservator Christina Taylor. I used wheat starch paste to consolidate the lifting paper on the box. Wheat starch paste and toned Japanese tissue paper was used to bridge the splits at the corners of the lid. And this is the image of the purse and the box after treatment. The treatment was subtle, but it's now safer to handle the box, and all of the rhinestones are back in place. Another collaborative project I had the opportunity to work on was this painted embroidered picture. For this project, I worked with Susan Enterline, a third-year graduate intern from Buffalo program. And this painted embroidered picture was associated with a local Philadelphia school run by husband and wife Samuel and Elizabeth Fulwell. These types of schools would teach young girls the craft of needlework, and then part of their learning, they would produce these types of embroidery to showcase their skills. So this object came to the museum in 1960, and it was framed in an unoriginal frame and had a mat board adhered directly onto the fragile chenille embroidery. And chenille is something akin to velvet, where there are little piles and hairs that make up like a fuzzy effect on the object, and this was not something that you want adhered to it. So sometime between 1960 and when Susan and I got to the object, the frame and mat board was removed, and it left behind brittle adhesive and a couple of tears. So, and then overall condition of the object, that we saw that the silk substrate was fragile and deteriorating, putting the object at risk for more tears in the future. So after conducting research to gain better understanding of the object's context and technique, which Susan will cover in her talk, Susan and I decided that we should mend the tears, remove the brittle adhesive, and find a way to support the silk substrate to protect the object overall. So I worked on the textile aspect, which included removal of brittle adhesive from the chenille embroidery without stripping the chenille of its pile. We wanted to have a reactivated adhesive lining to protect the silk substrate overall. And then for this, we needed to remove the strainer and flatten the tacking edges so that everything lay flat for lining. And for the lining, we used nylon bobinette that was dyed to match the reverse color of the object, and then casted out adhesive on the bobinette and reactivated it with acetone to attach it to the back of the object. And then at my very last day, I spent time building a padded board to support the differential weight between the embroidered area and the painted area to relieve the stress of that weight from the object. So this is where I'll stop talking about this, and Susan will pick up from where I left off to talk about next steps in her talk just after lunch. So aside from treatments from being conducted in the lab, I was able to participate in other conservation activities around the museum. So I assisted in minor treatment to prepare a quilt for exhibition, assisted in several gallery installations and de-installs, worked with 7 other conservators to wet clean a large tapestry, and helped it move around the lab as it was being lined throughout my time there, as well as spending a month in rug storage to assist in pest mitigation by wrapping, freezing, and vacuuming a lot of rugs within the collection. So I also got to spend time outside of the museum and the lab, and had opportunities to attend conferences, lab visits, and special exhibitions in Philadelphia and the surrounding states to add to the knowledge I was already gaining through my internship. Aside from conservation-related activities, I also took time to explore the new city I was living in. I attended sports games, concerts, celebrated holidays, visited surrounding cities, ate a lot of good food, and was able to share this experience with friends who came by for a visit. So overall, I had a fun and fulfilling year, and it would not have been possible without the financial support of the sources listed here. What I was able to present today was not something I could accomplish by myself, so I wanted to thank the art conservation team at the PMA, and especially the Costumes and Textile Lab and department for welcoming me to the team and providing me with guidance and support. I'm also thankful for the experience in my pre-program and all the institutions that took me under the wing and taught me about conservation. I want to thank the staff and faculty at Buffalo State for being there for our class over the past 3 years, and thank you for the class of 2024 for being the best cohorts anyone could ask for. I want to thank my family for flying across the country to attend my graduation. And I want to thank Diego for making every city we moved to for the past 3 years feel like home. And our 4 cats for their endless source of entertainment. So please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Quyen. We have time for 1 or maybe 2 questions.
Hi, Nhat. Thank you so much. Congratulations on an awesome talk. I just have a quick question. What is bobinette?
It is, it's kind of like a fishnet stocking, but instead of being adhered by heat to kind of like melt the polymers, it's actually twisted. Yes, so it's a plastic, it's a synthetic fabric, but instead of being adhered where that joint is really weak, it's twisted, and it gives us the flexibility that we need to support the differential areas between the painted and embroidered areas. Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions? I guess I might ask one. Yeah, I'll just use this microphone, I guess. I was really struck by the size of washing those tapestries, and I was wondering if you could just tell us what was the most surprising thing maybe you learned while dealing with something of that size.
How heavy it is. So with the tapestry, I helped clean it and you know that when textiles get wet, they don't get lighter. So it took at least 8 or 9 of us to lift it, and with wet cleaning, you have to clean the front and the back. So we set it up where dry, and then we wet up the front, and then when it got to the back, we had to physically roll the object, lift it, turn it around, and then unroll it. So it took a team of conservators and students and other people that were around to kind of like support that. And then when you thought that was over, you have to line it. And lining it requires more lifting to lay it out on the table, pin it, and after stitching it, you have to hang it up somehow to see how the object hangs. And that required a lot of engineering that I don't know about. But there's a pulley system we have in the lab, and we figured we were able to hang it up and have it hanging in the lab with the help of just 4 people. So it's a lot of weight. Yeah.
We have another question.
Hi, Nhat. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
I just have a quick question about the purse.
Yeah.
When you said that it had nitrocellulose adhesive on it and you were tipped off by the UV fluorescence, could you tell us more about that?
I can't say much about that. It was a collaboration between me and the objects fellow, and that was her approach to how she would kind of help identify the adhesive without having to sample it or doing a microchem test, and that was something she was like, oh, it's nitrocellulose, surprise, and then we just moved on to the next step. Yeah.
If anybody has one last question, we still have time. I wasn't sure how long questions might take. All right, I guess with that, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Jenni Krchak. Jenni attended the University of South Alabama in Mobile, where she earned a BA in art history. Her pre-program experiences include paintings conservation during a semester abroad in Florence, hurricane recovery work at Vizcaya Museum and Gardens in Miami, wall painting conservation at a medieval church in Wiltshire, England, and book and paper conservation at the Georgia Archives. Prior to her graduate studies, Jenni was a book designer with Negative Capability Press and an outreach coordinator at the Mobile Botanic Gardens. During the summer of 2022, she was a graduate intern at the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia, where she worked on both parchment and paper projects. Jenni spent her 3rd year interning in paper conservation at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond, Virginia, with Sam Sheasley, another graduate of our program. And she'll be staying on there for another year as the Assistant Conservator of Works on Paper NEH Fellow. She'll also serve as Programs Chair for the Virginia Conservation Association. Please join me in welcoming Jenni.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for that introduction, Teresa. Today I'll be sharing some of the highlights from my year working in the Paper Conservation Lab at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, as well as some of the other opportunities that I was able to participate in outside of the museum. Okay, so a little bit about the VMFA. It opened in 1936 in Richmond, Virginia, and is an encyclopedic museum. Over the years, there have been many major expansions as the collections continued to grow. Currently, plans for a new 5-story addition are underway to accommodate the rapid growth experienced over the past 15 years. One of the fastest growing areas of the museum is photography, with many large-scale contemporary works and artist archives being acquired. A bit about the history of the conservation department at the VMFA. It began in the 1970s with the hiring of a paintings conservator, shortly followed by the addition of objects conservation, and finally in 2015, paper conservation, when Sam Sheasley was hired to start the lab. Over 2/3 of the VMFA's collection is works on paper. This includes not only prints, drawings, paintings, but also Indian miniatures, tankas, parchment, archival materials, photos, and over 100,000 objects in the library collection. In less than 10 years, the paper department has grown from 1 to 5, including Sam Sheasley as Senior Conservator of Works on Paper, Heather Emerson and Heather Godowski, who are incredibly skilled conservation technicians, Erin Householder, who is our conservation matting and framing technician, and most recently, Colette Hardman-Peavy, who was hired in 2022 as the first photo conservator to care for the rapidly growing photo collection. It's really exciting that part of the latest expansion plan is to include a new purpose-built paper conservation lab, as well as hiring an East Asian paintings conservator. So the paper department has no shortage of work and is continuing to grow. So I'd like to start with this slide that includes all the pieces that I worked on over the past year. It was a challenge to choose which things to share with you today because it's been amazing. I was joking with Sam that she gave me too many good projects. Today, I'll be covering a small portion of my time with a focus on one large treatment and a variety of other experiences and skills learned along the way. So when I started the VMFA, Sam knew that I had a strong interest in the Deck Arts collection. So when the 6-foot poster was brought up to the lab for the statewide Art of Advertisement loan, I was more than happy to take on the treatment. This poster by Henri Ibel depicts the famous Jules Movisto, who was a cafe concert singer and pantomime actor at the turn of the century. It is a color lithograph, which was printed on 2 sheets that were seamed together. You can see the difference in color application between the 2 sections here, where one appears more blue and the other more red. Also in the margin, you can see where the width of the printed area differs between the 2 sections. In terms of condition issues, it had been lined with canvas, which was commonly seen with large posters. These prints were intended as ephemera, so they were typically printed on poor quality paper, which over time darkens and becomes brittle. Lining the print with canvas was a way to support the fragile paper. This before treatment photo uses raking light to help highlight planar distortions like wrinkles and creases. You can see a hard crease in the corner and these 2 horizontal creases where the poster had been folded up. There was also overall discoloration to the entire sheet. Okay. Of particular note, you can see this area where a patch had been applied to the verso of the poster, so you can see how much it has discolored. Sorry. So every step that we take during treatment serves a purpose. The plan for this piece began with spot testing. This includes testing all media, the paper, and the adhesive with anything that we plan to use during the treatment. This helps to inform what we can and cannot do during a treatment and what steps may be required. Surface cleaning is particularly important if wet treatment like washing is involved, because if the surface dirt is not reduced prior to the introduction of water, the dirt can become embedded in the fibers of the paper. Removal of the old canvas lining allows for an overall treatment of the piece, and washing helps to reduce soluble degradation products and extend the life of the artwork. Relining of the poster is completed with a mulberry paper, which is a more sympathetic lining material than canvas and provides the necessary support that the fragile paper needs. In painting and fills, address both aesthetic and structural issues that may otherwise distract from the overall piece. And finally, housing and framing provide the long-term protection. So after everything was spot tested and found to be stable and the lining adhesive appeared to soften with water, the plan for the lining removal could proceed. We began by humidifying the poster to help relax the paper and soften the lining adhesive. Here on the left, I'm brushing the poster out over a sheet of Mylar for humidification. After this step, the plan had been to place the poster in a shallow bath for the lining and adhesive removal. However, as we began to remove the canvas, it became clear that the adhesive layer was different than expected and was very crumbly. It was determined that the best approach was to remove the messy adhesive outside of the bath. Okay. So here you can see where we are removing the canvas layer on the right, which came off very easily, and then the opaque adhesive layer below. So we quickly realized that this was not behaving like a typical starch-based adhesive, as it was proving extremely difficult to mechanically remove. We decided to use hot water to help soften the adhesive, and also steam, which you can see Heather using on the right. This really became a team effort with everyone from paper and even our previous intern, Quyen, lending a hand over 2 full days of work. You can see a detail of Sam working on the left there, so you get a feel for what that adhesive was like. And during this process, I kept thinking, gosh, this really seems like wax. That doesn't make sense, though. Why would you put that on paper? But lo and behold, it was indeed wax. You can see where we compared that's the spectra for the unknown adhesive, and then to potential wax results that came up for the FTIR as oxidized wax with a opaque filler. And then also there was a bit of cellulose because of it being attached to the poster. So that was both a shocking and frustrating discovery because the application of wax on a paper object is not common at all and is something that none of us had encountered before. It resembled more of a wax lining used in paintings than it did any paper treatment. It also meant that continuing on with the hot water and steam method was the best way forward. After nearly 60 hours total from everyone who helped, the adhesive layer was successfully reduced. So during the lining removal process, the poster separated into 3 sections along the 2 strong creases where the poster had become brittle. And we actually used this to our benefit throughout the entirety of the treatment, including washing, lining, and inpainting. By working in sections, much less space was needed, handling and storage was significantly easier, and the lining process could be more easily controlled. The 3 sections were immersion washed separately, being careful to be as consistent as possible with the pH of the washing solution and the timing of the baths. So after the sections were washed, the relining of the poster had to be considered, and one of the major questions was whether or not the lining would stick. Typically, we use wheat starch paste to adhere a new mulberry paper lining. We decided to do a small test area on the poster by attaching a small piece of the lining paper with wheat starch paste. There was absolutely no adhesion once it dried. As you can see in this image, it resulted in an orange peel-like texture from the uneven expansion of the paper. Unfortunately, a fine layer of wax remained on the surface of the poster. Solvents could have been potentially considered. However, that would likely have required flushing the solvent through the object, possibly solubilizing the ink, and also due to the sheer size of the object, it just was not an option. So instead, developing an alternate adhesive blend was decided to be the best solution. So in developing an adhesive blend, good adhesion was important, but it also needed to be reversible. Ideally something that could be easily peeled away. A blend of methylcellulose and Lasco 498 was chosen after making several mock-ups using a small piece of we did not use a small piece of the poster. Using a similar paper to the poster and samples of the wax adhesive which had been collected. The Lasco 498 provided the adhesion and the methylcellulose provided added working time as well as reversibility. And the fine layer of wax actually served as a good barrier layer should the poster need to be retreated in the future. Okay. So once the adhesive blend was determined, the actual lining method was considered. Typically, a Dacron lining is used for large posters as it relies on tension to flatten the print as it dries, resulting in a very flat and uniform finish. Small mock-ups were made using the collected wax sample to test the Dacron method as well as drop lining method. Both worked well, however, in this case, there was concern that there may not be good adhesion with the waxy surface if only tension was relied on, as would be the case with the Dacron lining. While it may work While it may work with a mock-up that is 1 square inch, it could be a completely different case with a 6-foot poster. Because we felt that pressure was essential, the drop lining method was chosen. Okay. Before the lining process could begin, fragments, which had separated during the lining removal step, had to be placed. So this was about 125 fragments that I had to place temporarily back on the poster using small Japanese paper mends and wheat starch paste. And this was completed by working over the light table. On the right is one of the particularly tricky corners. About 18 fragments make up this 1.5 inch long section. So, luckily I had labeled the various locations of the fragments as they came out. The lining method chosen was a drop lining because it would allow for the application of pressure to encourage better bond with the potentially problematic surface. Once those sections were ready to be lined, they were humidified to relax the sheet, and then large tears were aligned. In the image on the left, I'm blotting up the excess water to hold the alignments in place. Next, the adhesive blend was brushed onto the lining paper, and it was dropped onto the back of the poster. Okay, so we have before treatment on the left, and after each section has been lined on the right. So next, the losses were filled with an acrylic tone mulberry paper, and in-painting was completed with watercolors over a barrier layer of methylcellulose for reversibility. So this was one of the more challenging areas of in-painting since it was a complex stair with losses. On the top is before fills and mending, and the bottom is after toned fills had been applied. And then here is the after in-painting has been completed on the right. So next came rejoining all 3 sections. This was completed by aligning the sections on the light table, weighting them in place, and using the excess lining paper of one section to join it to the other. So here's the before on the left and after on the right. I realize this may not look like much of a difference for over 200 hours of work. However, if you look at the area of the patch in the center of his chest, the change in contrast tells you how much discoloration was removed. It's significantly more stable now, and the planar distortions have been reduced, as you can see in this raking before and after. You'll also be happy to know that it no longer smells like elephants, which is how it was described when it came into the lab. So I call that a success. And then the final step for this piece was to create its permanent housing. With posters, it's a little bit different than your typical matting and framing treatment. Because they're so large, you cannot cut a mat to that scale. So we have to use spacers to create a safe distance between the object and the glazing. So on the left, you can see where I was toning a large sheet of paper to the color of the poster, which would then be used to wrap the spacers. It's an acrylic tube that we use. And so that's on the right. Okay. Then the poster had to be hinged so that it could be attached to a hex amount backing board. It's shades of my 695. And then the spacers were also hinged as well to be attached to that backing board. So here on the left, you can see a detail of those paper wrapped spacers, which the way that we cut the ends of the paper creates this really nice mitered corner. And then it's also very easy to, if later on you need to take it apart, you just cut that paper hinge that's wrapped around the corner and they just fold down to the side. And then on the right, Erin, who is our matting and framing technician extraordinaire, she was peeling away the top protective layer from the glazing. So we have the stack of, at the bottom is the strainer for the frame, then the hex mount with the artwork and the spacers attached to it, and then the glazing on top. And so all of this went into the frame. And of course, I had to pose like he was. A big thank you to Sam, Colette, Heather E. and Heather G, and Aaron and Keenan, because this was very much a group effort. Okay. So next up, the treatments I'll be covering are from a group of 31 works, including watercolor, pencil, ink, crayon, and collage pieces by Ted Jones, which were completed in 1956 during his travels throughout Africa. Experimental jazz musician, poet, and painter Ted Jones was associated with the bebop, jazz, surrealism, and beat poetry, 20th century movements that shaped contemporary artistic expression. These works are currently on view in the Land of the Renaissance exhibit in the Works on Paper Gallery. Okay, so here's an example of one of the pieces from the collection. They were dry mounted onto a poor quality acidic mat board. And for those of you who don't know what dry mounting is, it's essentially a tissue that has a heat activated adhesive layer. And you use it to attach the artwork to a board with pressure and heat. And they had all been treated this way, and they had also all been through a water event, so they had similar tide lines along the right side of all of the pieces, which ended up creating much more degradation in those areas of the pieces where the board was a lot more friable. Okay. So the pieces were divided up between everybody in the lab, and I was assigned 5 of these pieces. And the main treatment for these included backing removals, so removing that acidic mat board. And that is done by shaving away layers of the mat board until you reach the art. So the image on the left shows in progress with the art face down on the table. And at this point, I had shaved away all the mat board except for the facing paper seen here. So we have the facing paper, and then below that is the dry mount adhesive, and then you finally get to the art. So what was really exciting was that some pieces actually had other drawings on the back that had not been seen before. I was lucky that 3 out of the 5 that I was assigned had additional drawings or paintings. So one project that I really enjoyed was being able to help with the deinstall and storage of 3 massive works on paper by Athena Latoka. The pieces were free hanging and attached to the wall with strategically placed staples as requested by the artist. The materials used included Spanish moss, soil, sand, paint, and various things collected by Latoka from specific sites. This added another level of difficulty in terms of handling on top of their already sheer size. So each piece was detached from the wall, making sure that all of the staples that Sam had carefully painted were removed. That was quite a difficult Easter egg hunt, if you want to call it. She did a very good job. They were then carefully walked down the ladders on either side and placed on the floor. They were then carefully rolled around a large tube and wrapped in Tyvek for safe storage. One of the most difficult things was trying to find a tube that was large enough because the diameter you wanted it to be wider so that there would not be as much tension and bending of the paper as it was rolled up. And I particularly appreciated learning this trick for securing the twill tape without using a knot, which would create a pressure point on the art. So they just twisted the twill tape around instead of tying it. Yeah. Being able to work along Sam and the art handlers to develop a method for safely removing the pieces from the wall and storing for future installations was an amazing experience. It really made me appreciate the skills and knowledge that our art handlers have and their ability to work with such challenging pieces. During my year at the VMFA, I have also been able to gain experience working with photos, thanks to our photo conservator, Colette Hardman-Peavy. This was my first involved photo treatment, so I was excited to be assigned these 4 working photos by Louis Hine, who was known for documenting child labor during the early 20th century. Each photo has inscriptions from Hine, noting his working methods and, in some cases, comments about the imagery. On the verso of this image of a group of children, it reads, "A family, the smile is for the camera, it does not last long." Yeah. So with raking light, the condition issues can be clearly seen. This includes a strong curl, hard creases at the corners, several tears, and lifting emulsion. There were also many fine creases and cracks in the emulsion from handling. Treatment involved some of the same steps used in paper conservation, including surface cleaning, applying mulberry paper mends, and humidification and flattening. However, because of the layered nature of a gelatin silver print, moisture was limited. Using dilute warm gelatin, the delicate lifted emulsion was laid back down and the cracking emulsion was consolidated. So here's the before and after in normal light and in raking light. You can see that the curl and hard creases have been significantly reduced, while the fine handling creases remain. One of the things that I had to learn while working with photos was that even though they have a paper component and many of the treatment techniques are similar, they respond rather differently. I'm used to having a sheet of paper being almost perfectly flat after humidification and flattening. So Colette had to remind me that this is not the case with photos, and that soft curl that remained in my photo is perfectly normal. I'm looking forward to working with more photos and becoming more familiar and comfortable with them. Okay, so one of the most rewarding things that I was able to do was work with our pre-program interns. It's really wonderful to be at a point where I can start to give back by mentoring to the up-and-coming people in the field. So as I mentioned earlier, Quyen was a huge help with the poster, and she was there during the fall. And then we also had 3 summer pre-program interns, one in paintings, paper, and objects. And I had the opportunity to lead a full-day workshop on paper making. So we made Eastern and Western style papers and talked about the different properties of each. And it was great to see Amaya, who was our paper intern, be able to then use that knowledge and information that they had learned to apply towards their conservation treatment decisions. Also exciting news. I was able to go to the AIC conference where I presented on my research into strawboard and also made a poster, which I was very surprised when it was awarded the Big Cheese Award. And yes, very exciting experience, and I'm really grateful to Aaron, Rebecca, and Teresa for co-authoring that research with me. So unlike some of my other classmates, I did not do a 20-day option. However, I did get to go and do a 2-week papyrus conservation workshop at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And so we had 10 people in our group, and they were from all over the world, and they were all just wonderful to work with. And one of the most fun things about the group is that we had 2 pepperologists in the group, one from Oxford, who had been working with their collection since 1996, and another one who was a current graduate student. So we would be working on the papyrus fragments, not really know which way the text should go, and we could go over and say, "Hey, Ben, can you tell me what this says?" And he would just walk over and read it to us. So pretty amazing group. So before I went to this workshop, I was able to take a look at one of the papyrus pieces that we have at the VMFA, which is a fragment of the resurrection of Osiris. And I was really grateful that we were able to take it off view so that I could open it up and really get a good look at it. So in this case, the entire piece had been mounted to a heavy, probably acidic paper support, and then it was cornered onto a mat board. I had some images from 1962 of this object that I was able to compare to, and in the green you can see areas that I noted of change since those 1962 images. And then in particular the delamination of the layers of the papyrus, because you have one horizontal and one vertical layer of the papyrus. So at the workshop, we were assigned different pieces from the collection, and this was one of the particularly challenging pieces that I had. It had very thick, fibrous bits to it that were challenging to realign and lay back down. So here's the before of that particular fragment. You can see it's very crumpled up, especially on that left-hand side, and just everything's kind of skewed a bit. And then there's after. So next up, I'm going to be going to Oslo for the International Paper Historians Conference. We're hoping to learn about the latest in paper research and analysis so that I can bring back some of the ideas from my coworkers that we can apply to future exhibitions. So long list of acknowledgements. Of course, thank you to all of the donors who have made my education possible. So grateful for the amazing faculty and staff in the Conservation Department here at Buffalo State, especially Teresa for your guidance and support throughout these past 3 years as my advisor, and for sharing your love of paper with me. I aspire to have a study collection as awesome as you one day. To my brilliant cohort, it's been so much fun getting to know you and your wonderfully quirky personalities. And to Claire, I'm glad that you were the one that I got to work with in the paper lab. And thank you for keeping me sane when things went sideways. Yes. And then thank you so much to everyone at the BMFA for warmly welcoming me to the museum, to everyone in paper conservation, Sam, Colette, Heather E., Heather G., and Aaron. I couldn't have asked for a better group of people to work with. I've learned so much from each of you, and I'm always amazed by your skills, your kindness, and the ability to make me laugh every day. When it came time to look for post-grad placements, I found it difficult to consider anything other than the VMFA. So I'm really glad you decided to keep me. I can't wait to spend the next year continuing to work, learn, and laugh with you. Of course, I couldn't have done this without the support of my family and friends. So thank you to my partner, Nhat, for sticking with me for the past 3 years. You've been amazing. And finally, to my parents for their unwavering support and teaching me and showing me, by example, what it means to do good and meaningful work. I couldn't have done it without you. Okay. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Jenni?
Great presentation, Jenni. You did great. My one question is about the poster. When you first showed it to us, you showed the margins didn't align when I guess came into the lab. Did you consider that as you went through your treatment? I didn't quite understand if you separated it there or it separated elsewhere.
Yes, so that was one of the weird things about that treatment. So the difference in the margins was because it was 2 different litho stones, so they were just 2 different prints. Like I said, these pieces were ephemera, you know, slap them up at the wall for a particular thing and then they just go away. So that was something that you just kind of had to accept with this piece, that it wasn't going to perfectly line up. And also the fact that that middle seam never came apart. So the part where it separated is actually where it had been previously folded, and essentially it was super brittle along that fold line. And it just, I think it had already separated when it was initially lined, and just didn't realize that until we got that old lining off.
Thank you so much. Amazing presentation. My question is about the adhesive blend used for the poster and the ratio favor methylcellulose. And I was wondering if that was also in consideration of it being more reversible in the future.
Yes, it was. So I did quite a few mock-ups, and I was trying to find something that it was going to stay in place, but then it was also able to be kind of peeled away easily. So it had just enough strength to do what it needed to do, but not to be on there forever. And then the methylcellulose also helped a lot with the working properties of the adhesive.
Hi there, Jenny. Great job. Well done. Thanks. I just had a quick question about the papyrus piece that's at the VMFA. Are you going back to it?
I hope so.
Me too.
So this was 3 weeks ago. Yes, I had the workshop. So I went to Ann Arbor for 2 weeks, came back to the VMFA for a week, and now I'm here. So hopefully getting to revisit that at some point. But it would be a fairly minor treatment. That was one of the main things I wanted to learn at this workshop, was what could be done for this piece, with it being completely adhered overall to the paper support, because typically they're just glazed between glass. So it was suggested not to attempt removing the piece. So
thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you to all the first 5 speakers. They've been great. Now we have a lunch break. We'll be back at 2. But before the class of 2024 goes on lunch break, I'd like you all to come to here to this stage so we can get your photograph. It's part of the program. It's written in, and we'll do it. Thanks. See you at 2.
I do not. I would assume JJ, but